How did Jesus manage to teach such amazing truths that stayed in the minds of the people? The Industrial Revolution began in the 18th century in Britain and then spread to other parts of the world. As a result of that, people began to leave their agrarian lifestyle of farming, of cultivating land, and for the first time in history, people began using machines. Now, this was not too long back. It was just around 200 years ago. So imagine life on Earth 2,000 years ago. Back then, people would never have dreamt of vehicles, let alone motor-driven cars. 2,000 years ago, the Mercedes-Benz was a donkey. The only upgrade they knew were better donkeys and better horses. Back then, they could not even imagine a thing like a computer or a smartphone or even a light bulb. Their smartphone was a quill and a paper scroll. And their most powerful torch was candlelight. They didn't even see a book until 1,500 years later. They never traveled the world. They didn't even know America existed. They did not have even a fraction of the knowledge we have today. It was during such a time that God chose to come to the earth in the second person of His Son, Jesus Christ. Despite such limitations, Jesus communicated eternal truths to the whole world. He spent 3.5 years preaching. That is all. But now 2,000 years later, the truths that He shared need no editing, no updating, no amending. When Jesus spoke those truths, they were not printed, but they were handwritten on scrolls, then compiled and preserved by ordinary fishermen. And it was only 1,400 years later that these precious truths were finally printed and compiled as the Bible in Germany by the German craftsman Johannes Gutenberg. Today, the Bible is the most loved, most read, and most published book in history. So an important question we must ask is, how did Jesus manage to teach such amazing truths that stayed in the minds of the people? He had no gadgets. He had no recording device. No phone, no social media, not even a simple printing machine. He didn't have a pen or paper like we have. He simply taught verbally, and it stayed in people's minds. So how did He do it? Well, Jesus used illustrations, analogies, parables, and stories. And communication experts say that this is the best way to teach. Jesus used everyday objects and situations. He communicated deep truths about God and His kingdom using the examples of trees and fruit and leaves and seed. He spoke about sheep and bread and oil and water and wind. Jesus found spiritual meaning in the ground we walk on, in stones, in the weather, even in people. And the great apostle Paul too followed his example and taught kingdom truths using ordinary items like footwear, crops, rain, the sun, stars, and so on. Today, let us follow that example and learn something from the simple objects, the mirror and the comb. Yes, these are just ordinary, everyday, simple objects, but sometimes simple speaks far better and clearer. Everybody uses a mirror and a comb, unless, of course, nature has made them bald as a football. Now, I want you to think deeply about these two ordinary objects, the mirror and the comb. You use these objects every day, but notice that these two very useful objects play distinct roles. You cannot interchange their use. You cannot comb your hair with a mirror or look at yourself with a comb. No, the mirror serves its purpose and so does the comb. These roles are unique. The mirror has only one purpose, and that is to show you your image. It shows you exactly what you look like right now in real time, and it shows you nothing else. It will not show you how you were yesterday or how you will be tomorrow. And the mirror doesn't flatter you by showing an improved version of you. There are fancy mirrors that do that. They may show you how you would like to be, maybe 10 kilos less. But I'm talking of an ordinary mirror. Its only purpose is to reflect your image back to you, and it does its job well. Maybe you don't like your face, maybe you don't like your shape, or maybe you don't like your hair. But the mirror will not hide that from you. It will expose the truth about you. It will show you who you really are. You can sit down and polish the mirror for hours, but that's not going to make you look better. In fact, it will show you minute flaws when it is polished. So my friend, if you're losing hair or if your hair is messed up, the mirror will tell you the truth about your appearance, and that's where its job ends. And what about the comb? Once the mirror has done its job, the comb is ready for action. The comb is there only to tidy up your hair. Every morning, the mirror shows you the truth about yourself, about your hair, and then you reach for the comb. So, in a sense, it is the mirror that makes you need the comb. Now let us look at this powerful illustration. The mirror is like the Old Testament and the comb is like the New Testament. Together they form the Bible. Although the Bible is one book, chronologically these two testaments are separated by a period of 400 years. So God did not intend for these two testaments to overlap in any way. So it's a great tragedy that there are preachers today who ignore the 400 years and cannot understand the difference between the two testaments. They teach the Old Testament law as it were New Testament doctrine. They quote from the Old Testament to validate their strange teachings which are not found in the New Testament. Do you realize what these preachers are doing? They are using the Old Testament mirror as a comb. How hilarious is that? Dear friend, the Old Testament law is just like the mirror. It was given to us for only one purpose, and that is to show us who we are. Without the law of God, we will think we are fine. And so the law is merciless like the mirror. It points out all our flaws. It points out our failings in character and conduct. It shows us our sinfulness and the corruption deep within our hearts. The high standards specified in the law are not given for us to keep them, but for us to know that we simply cannot keep them. Let me read to you a verse from the New Testament. Romans chapter 5 verse 20 states, God's law was given so that all people could see how sinful they were. There you have it, plain and simple. But maybe an example will help you understand even better. Do you remember the story of the pool of Bethesda in John chapter 5? We see crowds of sick people, the blind, the lame, or even paralyzed, all staying there in the 5 porches. Now, just imagine, I walked up to these crippled people, paralyzed folk, some without limbs, some without legs, and I go there and lecture them on mountain climbing, base jumping, zip lining, parkour, all forms of gymnastics, or about playing football or cricket or swimming against ocean currents, escaping shark attacks. How stupid, how unrealistic is that? But that's exactly what is happening now. That's exactly what we are like. We are those paralyzed people. We simply don't realize how sin has paralyzed us, not just stained us. We are damaged to the point that we cannot walk, we cannot do anything. We are like those crippled folk in Bethesda. But because preachers are not preaching the gospel with its mirror and comb, many of us do not realize how damaged we are. We have no legs, but we are still trying to walk. We don't have hands, but we are trying to do things. We don't have eyes, but we are trying to see. We are trying to be holy. We are trying to be righteous. We are trying to be humble and obedient. Why? This is because for many, many years we have been taught this by preachers who do not know the difference between the mirror and the comb. They stand at the pulpit and scream out the law and its standards and then command us to keep it. They tell us crippled folk to climb towers and touch the sky. While we have no hands, they are telling us to swing the bat correctly and hit the ball over the fence. So in the end, what do these preachers achieve? They succeed in making us feel miserable about ourselves and increasingly hopeless. Oh, the more they shout, put your life right, and you are very rebellious, you must obey God, be holy, be humble, be faithful, be prayerful. And our heart sinks lower and lower and lower into depression. What is the purpose of the mirror? The mirror is there to show us who we are, but not to discourage us. The mirror must make us realize how crippled we are. And how does it do it? The law commands us to run so that we may realize we are crippled and we cannot run. That is when we will cry out, I need help. When Jesus went to that lame man in Bethesda, he found him lying there. He had been a cripple for 38 years. And what was his complaint? He said, "The angel comes to stir that water, and anyone who gets in there gets healed. But I can't. I'm crippled. No one has carried me to the water to be healed." That poor man bewailed his condition every time the water bubbled up. But nobody looked at him with compassion. Others got in and were healed. Now, how did that man feel? That is what the law does to us. It keeps reminding us of our condition. The law of God is a mirror pushed into our face, and it cries, "Look! Look at how ugly you are. Look at how sinful you are." And if the law does that work, it has succeeded. That is all it has to do. Look at Paul. Paul had a very high regard for himself. He thought he was pleasing to God. He thought he was blameless until he looked into the mirror of the law. And as he examined himself, the law began to expose his dark and hidden, exceeding sinful nature. And that is when he cried out, "Oh, wretched man that I am!" The law of God is truly a mirror that tells us the brutal truth about ourselves. It shows us our ugly, sinful, total depravity. It shows us that we do not have the power to adhere to its demands or make ourselves into better people. It only makes us aware of how crippled we are by our sinful nature. But then here's the good news. It's not just a mirror of the law. There is a comb waiting for us. God has his own beauty brand of grace. He has a cosmetic salon full of special beauty picks made just for you. They say our God is full of care. I agree. He has hair care, skin care, body care, soul care, mind care. Oh, thank God for the comb of the New Testament. When the mirror of the law shows us our ugliness, we can really become terrified. But then God doesn't leave us there. He brings us to his own beauty parlor to beautify our soul with his own righteousness. A story that has gone viral is about an Irishman who has become very famous because of what he did in India. Walking down the streets, one day he found a homeless man sleeping on a bare sidewalk. The man was in a really unkempt condition with overgrown hair and beard and not even having proper clothes. The Irishman patted his hand and woke him up and invited him for a haircut. This man must have thought he is dreaming, because he would have been seeing his own deteriorating condition every day on various glass doors and windows of cars. And every day was a hopeless day. And now suddenly he's being invited for a complete makeover. So the homeless man sat down, and after giving him a haircut, the Irishman washed and scrubbed this man and then gave him a complete change of clothes. What do you think that poor man must have been thinking? He must have been so puzzled and confused about what was happening. All these months, no one cared. He spent every day in hopelessness, and then suddenly this happens? Who am I that this gentleman should love me like this and do all this freely for me? What did I do to deserve this? They finished with a lovely meal together. And that is exactly what the gospel does. Jesus is crying to every sinner whose life is like that homeless man in a spiritual sense. He's lying down, depressed, struggling with his sin, with his addiction. And Jesus is saying, "Come unto me." That is the cry of Jesus. Come, I will help you. I will give you rest. Come and eat with me. All who are thirsty, come and drink freely. This homeless man simply heard the invitation and sat down on the sidewalk on a blanket and let the Irishman do his magic. And what a transformation that was. The 90-second video on Instagram has notched up over 100 million views. And that is the beautiful picture of the gospel. What did that homeless man do to deserve this change? Nothing. And how did he contribute to the change? He did nothing except allow the gentleman to do his job. My dear friend, if you are struggling with yourself, if you're really burdened about your sinfulness, if you're really troubled saying, "I'm not spiritual, I'm always sinning, I do not know what to do," please listen. There is no use of being frustrated about yourself and your failures. You can do nothing about it, and God expects you to do nothing about it. The only thing I would say that you must do is to humbly realize your helpless state. God is tapping you. You who are hopeless, lying and wallowing in your sin, God is tapping you and waking you up and calling you and saying, "Come, sit down on my blanket, and I will do the rest. I will give you rest." Please understand, my friend, it is your pride that will prevent you from accepting your true condition. And that is why the mirror of the law must do its work till it breaks your pride and crushes that rebellion, and you approach God in humility, saying, "God, I need your grace." The beauty of what God's grace can do can be fully understood only when we realize how fallen we are. When the law shows us our wretchedness and makes us realize that we deserve nothing but death, that's when we become desperate for God's grace, understanding how precious it is. And that's why in the song Amazing Grace we see that beautiful line, "How precious did that grace appear, the hour I first believed." It is then that we fully yield to the Holy Spirit to beautify us by the grace of God. Because the preaching you're hearing is all by preachers who are like Old Testament prophets. If that is how you're living, then you will constantly be trying to make yourself good with your own strength. But that's not going to help you. Oh, the Old Testament is all about me trying to improve myself with my own ability and failing and falling. But grace is about a supernatural power outside of us, changing us. Like that Irish man touching the poor homeless man and changing him completely. When the mirror has done its job of showing us how weak we are, that's when we will come to the cross desperately, and the comb begins its supernatural work. Thank God, His grace is sufficient to beautify the worst sinner. So, dear friend, no matter how much you have sinned, no matter how many times you have done that same thing over and over and over, no matter how far you've gone, no matter how long you've hardened your heart, no matter what you think, and no matter if you have lost all hope, there is a door open for you, and a loving voice inviting you in. Come, dear one, come, my beloved friend, come and sit down on my blanket. I will help you. I will wash you. I will change you. Do not lose heart. I will do it all for you, my friend. And so let me finish with this. Do not give up, for as long as the cross still stands, there is hope for you. God, our God, will not leave you or forsake you.